Okay, welcome everybody. So we're going to shift into the focus of the session for today. And the intention of the session, of the space, is to invite more space in our movements to reflect, explore, and learn from each other on what decolonization means in the context of narrative change work. And we want to welcome a lot into that discussion, into this space together. So we want to welcome our full selves in. This space may be more emotional for some people than others. The content, the focus on decolonizing and coloniality relates to a lot of real world experience for folks in the space, as well as to the experiences of our ancestors in different ways. And so we really welcome people like bringing their emotions, their bodies, their life experiences into the space, and ask that we each hold that with care in how we contribute to the space. The narrative change, the world of narrative change has long been very centered on white thought, white experience, and we are, like, the work that we are doing, as you'll hear more about, is an attempt to recenter that, recenter the experiences of folks who have historically been marginalized from these spaces. And so we invite you all to bring yourselves into the space in the complexity there. So, quick note on why PERC is doing the work that we're doing in the world. We thought we'd give you a brief overview of our analysis, why we're doing what we're doing, and why we think this work is needed. So, we see society as built on narratives. Narratives of our past, present, and future are the scaffolding of our political systems, our social structures, our own thinking, how we move through the world, and how the narratives shape our experiences of the world. The old narratives have told us that things would only get better. If we work hard, we'll do well in life, and some of us are better than others. These narratives have failed us. We believe that we need new narratives to help bring new worlds into being. And so for over a decade, we've been supporting social movements to map, develop, and strengthen the narratives that unite us. We're on a journey and we've got lots more learning to do, but we're in it for the long haul. And so our strategy for the coming years is to diversify, democratize, and deepen our movement's crucial work on storytelling, narrative, and framing. And part of the reason why we're holding this space today is to try and really get to grips and problematize some of even the language in the context of our work, thinking about words like diversifying and how they've been used and co-opted over the years. What does democratizing mean in practice? And particularly today, we're going to bring a focus on the work of decolonizing narrative change, which we'll dig into shortly. And just a note on terminology, which we could have a whole other call looking at the differences between some of the terms that we use in narrative change work. But we wanted to get a little bit clearer for you today, if this work is newer to you, on what we mean when we use the term narrative. So this diagram we found it really helpful as a beautiful illustration from the folks at the Narrative Initiative in the US around the level that we are operating at. And aiming to affect change in. So this is the waves metaphor, and that the idea is that at the surface of the ocean, we find the day-to-day news stories, messages in tweets and social media, actions on the street, ways that we're spoken to and engage with folks in the world. At the surface of the ocean, we find ourselves tossed around by the waves of these messages and stories. They keep us disoriented on the ocean surface, and they're focused on each event in our lives, episode by episode, obscuring the wider patterns and narrative currents that underpin these events. So stories bring narratives to life by making them relatable, accessible, and even personal. And then below that level, in the midst of the ocean, we find narrative currents, which we see as a coherent or a collection, a coherent system of stories that are refined over time. They infuse the stories with deeper meaning, just as underwater currents generate waves at the surface of the ocean. And then further below that still are the values, the worldviews, the deep narratives that our world is bound up in the deep, long-lasting history of societal change over time. Worldviews are embedded and pervasive in culture. We use them to understand history and current events while informing identity, community, and belonging. Values and worldviews shape our relationship to our day-to-day lives. And that's the level that we believe is important for us to focus on. This is the area that we're really passionate about at PERC, on putting our energy into. And I could tell you some more stories. I really recommend checking out the Narrative Initiatives blog about this, which we'll share in the chat box, that tells stories that with like tangible examples around how the narratives of white supremacy can be seen through this lens of like deepening our understanding and our analysis of how narratives shape the world that we walk through, that we live in. We believe that our societies are built on these narratives and these deep, long-lasting worldviews. And there are many groups already doing really great work. Many comms strategists and campaigners focus on shaping the surface, the ocean's surface of our day-to-day messaging and storytelling. And so we're focusing on building power at the grassroots to take on the deeper narratives that I've been talking about. And if that metaphor didn't work for you, then another one offered by Elena in her blog Narrative is Fractal on the PERC website, which we can share too, is the metaphor of narrative mosaics. These big pictures that build up over time through the accumulation of many smaller stories. Again, influenced by Narrative Initiatives' excellent thinking. Elena shares a bit more about how the deep narrative of white supremacy is built up through the accumulation of day-to-day harms and day-to-day racism and white supremacy. So before we get going and hear from our panelists, we just wanted to acknowledge the work that's come before us, those we're inspired by in the Black feminist tradition. So the likes of Bell Hooks and Adrienne Mary Brown, ACE organizations like WeFrame, already talked about the Narrative Initiative, Decolonising Economics, the Combahee River Collective, the Centre for Story-Based Strategy, Mariam Makaba, Healing Justice London, Voices That Shake, so many more folks that this work is part of a very long history of struggle to uproot the colonial history and legacy that is still with us and very active today. And so we wanted to really honour the work that has come before, that is very much alive in the world. And we wanted to also thank the reflections, feedback and guidance that we've had from the fabulous folks of our crack design team, Henna Shah, Selena Nwulu, and Maya, Elena and Kennedy, who we're going to be hearing more from. Lastly, a quick invitation, propagation from the folks at Decolonising Economics, which I think helped me to ground myself in how the work of decolonising connects to narrative change. So I hope this is useful for you too. But for us, decolonising invites us to interrogate the narratives, attitudes and beliefs that influence what we value in society, and therefore where we see patterns of wealth, privilege and power. So let's just take a moment to sit with that from Guppy and Noni at Decolonising Economics, to open up the space and have a think about where this is landing for us and where the work is that's needed. I'm going to pass over now. I'm going to introduce our panelists, the fab friends and collaborators. that we are very, 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 very privileged to be in relationship with at PEC. So I'm going to hand over to Yas to say hi. And Yas, if you want to pass it along, that would be great.
Hello. Am I just introducing myself, or am I answering a question also at this point?
Let's hear who you are, and we'll do a question in a moment.
Okay, yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Yaz. My pronouns are they, them. I'm also welcoming BB the dog, Mandy the cat, and all other animals and humans in this space. It's really nice to be here with you all today. I work for PERC. I'm our workshops lead, so I mostly do design and delivery of like what it says on the tin, workshops that we do with different folks, mostly in the UK, but also occasionally other places in Europe as well. I really I'm at a loss of like interesting things to say about myself, apart from I really like cats, which is but yeah, I guess I also I come from a background of like campaigning and community organizing. I started doing stuff when I was a teenager and did like lots of youth peer-to-peer kind of learning and activism stuff. And then I also have some experience in journalism, and I also worked in the domestic and sexual abuse sectors for a really long time. So yeah, I'm kind of coming from with a like lens on, I guess I have those experiences, and they're like coming into and informing like how I'm going to be answering stuff today. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Yaz. Elena, who are you?
Hi, I'm Elena. I use she, her pronouns. I used to work at PERC for a really long time, for most of my adult working life. And I'm still based in Mid Wales, where PERC is based, but I now work in grant making. So I was going to say I've moved to the dark side, but I don't mean that. I'm in a complicated space now. It's an interesting space to be in. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and names, and also just so many other faces and names. It's really, really feels like a real privilege to be having this conversation with all these people. While I was at PERC, I was working on narrative and framing work for a really long time. I think I saw Tom Crompton's name pop up somewhere, but we started by supporting Tom with a report, a very influential and wonderful report that he had written on called Common Cause, which was all about how values shape culture. And yeah, from that point just took a kind of long meandering journey through the world of cultural change and framing and narrative, and constantly flummoxed and baffled and intrigued and curious by all the multiple things that we have turned up. And yeah, kind of really cemented my passion, I guess, in participatory methodologies and collaborative working on how we do social change, how we do cultural change, how we do narrative change. Currently just moved into participatory grant making, so that's exciting. I'm in Mid Wales. We've just had some unbelievable weather, but looking at it now you wouldn't know at all, but it honestly looked like a tiny little mini tornado outside for a minute. I also love cats, but right now I'm dog sitting, and this dog is apparently scared of cats, so scared of random textures of floor and scared of cats, so we're gonna have a lovely few days. Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. I'll pass to Maya.
Hello all, my name is Maya. I use she and they pronouns. It's lovely to be with all of you. I am calling in from South Africa, from Cape Town, and there's a bit of background noise where I am because there is some ferocious wind that is going on outside. But I'm lucky to have some sunshine alongside with that. And as you might be able to hear from my accent, I grew up in the US, but I'm currently based mostly between London and South Africa. I come to this panel and the work that I do through primarily a vantage point of community organizing and activism and campaign work. Like Yaz, I came into this work when I was a high schooler and was agitated around things like the school to prison pipeline and more broadly prison police and border abolition work, as well as feminist and queer and overall gender justice, and have also been an ally and involved in sort of worker solidarity and economic dignity organizing, which is how I got linked up with the beautiful folks on this panel. I'm currently a researcher in social movements here in South Africa and doing some kind of cross-cutting work looking at movement and multiracial solidarity in the UK, in South Africa, and in the US. And I'm also an independent consultant to a variety of social movements, particularly around things like strategy, story, and structure. And I'm a member of a number of really rad, beautiful direct action and organizing spaces. Yeah, and I'm also a musician and an artist. So I think narrative in all its forms are things that I think about a lot in my work these days. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for welcoming yourselves in so fully. It's really great to hear a little bit more about all of your work, and for folks that are on the call with us, and if there's more that you would like to find out about the work that Yaz, Elena and Maya were sharing, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. And we've shared a few links from some of what was discussed in that opening go round, but I'm sure there is much more depth and richness in the snapshot. So let's get into it. Let's dive in a little bit more deeply. This is, like, for us, very much part of a very, very long journey and many different paths that can be taken ahead. So it's an opener to take the conversation out of our small office in Wales. But yeah, this is a start, and we would love to continue this conversation with you all. So let's see where we get to today on a very, very windy path forwards. Let's go. The first question that I've got for you all is, what does decolonizing narratives mean to you? Let's start there. And folks who are with us, feel free to listen, jump in with questions at any point, share your questions in the chat box, and we'll go from there. Yaz, would you like to start us off? We'll go back round in the same order. What does decolonizing narratives mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll try and speak a bit to like perk generally, and also like responding as me too. But yeah, we've been doing, like, it's obviously like a ongoing question that we have in our work, and something that we I think it's important that we're not just always coming back to it, but actually like centering it in everything that we're doing, particularly as we're like going forward with this new strategy. But yeah, I think it's about us questioning like where power has historically been held and historically lies in our sector, across all of our organizations, including our own, who's been making the decisions, who has been leading on the research and reports that we share as oh yeah, this is what narrative knowledge is, when actually there's so much rich knowledge about narrative, and so much of a deeper understanding about the narratives that shape our world, from people with lived experience who have historically been really shut out of this sector and not paid for the work that they're doing, or recognized for the work that they're doing, or given resource for the work that they're doing. And so I think it's important for us to ask that of ourselves as an organization, okay, we've been doing this work for 10 plus years now, and we are obviously getting funding from places and getting resource from places, and how do we use that kind of power that we have in the sector to redistribute that and feed it back to the people on the front line. Yeah, I guess that's a bit about how we do narrative change work, and that then influences the narratives themselves. So we've obviously been there's a lot of colonial narratives around us, and if we're gonna break those down and move towards decoloniality, and obviously it's not an end destination, it's a journey where there is no destination, but we keep moving further towards it as much as we can, then we need to be led by those folks with lived experience, and their narratives need to be, as a society, what we prioritize and what we lean towards in creating and dreaming of a new world. Yeah.
Thanks, Yaz. Elena, what does decolonizing narratives mean to you?
I had to write some notes for myself because I felt like I had too much to say about all the things, particularly when you've worked in this for a long time. There's so many avenues to go down. So so I've written some notes for myself, but so yeah, I guess I just kind of first wanted to say that I feel like it's really important to acknowledge and name that there are still multiple really real and material forms of and instances of colonialism and colonization in the world, and I just kind of really want to acknowledge and feel that, and even where colonization has ended, there mostly haven't been reparations for the extraction and violence that has occurred. But yeah, I think what we're kind of focusing on here today is how the features of colonization, the features of coloniality, have been kind of embedded within current power structures, resource distribution, and also and how that's upheld by cultural features, the way that we are together, and the narratives that are shaping those ways that we are together, and how we distribute resources. So I think, as Yaz said already, we see coloniality and the features of coloniality in narrative a lot. I mean, I think I'm hoping we'll get more into the detail of it in a bit, but the imperialism that we see within the narratives that pushed us towards Brexit, for example, and multiple other, we see it that they're live. But yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to focus a little bit on the kind of how and the practice, So I left Perk a couple of years ago. I was working there for over 10 years, and most of that time looking at framing a narrative across lots of different issues. And yeah, I guess my starting point is just my experience of having been in the sector for a long time, and noticing that even when we were in spaces in which we were talking about how we address how we're working on narratives that are challenging power structures, whether it like anti-racism, other forms of anti-oppression, I would often notice that I was the only person of colour in the room, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And lots of other folks, lots of other faces, lots of other voices missing too. That was kind of my starting point of just like, yeah, this is that, you know, there's a replication of forms of power structures in these spaces. There were places where this felt like particularly stark, like egregious, like almost entirely white groups who were talking about how to frame development, for example, or migration. But it felt kind of like endemic, like the folks who were resourced to do this kind of work, particularly at the like strategic level, were usually quite removed from the like blunt effects of the things that we were talking about. I was kind of thinking about this, like I think this is because I just made a really delicious cake the other day, but I was thinking if you like took a cross section of the narrative change sector, as if it was a delicious narrative cake, it would look very similar to, it would be a good replica of any other kind of extractive colonial system, in which there were largely white, better resourced, able-bodied bodies, resourcing other largely white, able-bodied, better resourced bodies, etc., bodies to do this work, to produce knowledge, to produce outputs that are often extracted from and using like brown, black, queer, immigrant, disabled, poor, etc. bodies. The bodies that would be most impacted by the issues that we're talking about, but who are consistently like excluded and disenfranchised from like the strategic level, in particular the decision making. And as you get further down the pie, the cake, the delicious narrative cake, you'd start to see those bodies. So, you know, people would start talking about diversifying, and you'd get people at the comms face of it might be more showing those kind of characteristics. And I think that this kind of like inevitably spills into narrative strategy and comms and framing outputs. I don't think it's to say that like you can't talk about an issue that you don't have experience of. Like I don't think that could, I think that there has to be an element of us working together. But when you've got a whole like a kind of crucial missing viewpoint, then I think it's unsurprising that you end up with these like consistent, like, I want to call them faux pas just to be polite, but these kind of consistent ways of presenting issues that we're working on, such as kind of beneficiaries and saviors and all of these kind of like problematic colonial type framings that we see. But I think that the problem is that like just focusing on the who takes you into thinking that representation will fix this, and I think that we know that is not the case. Across the board, we've seen that you can just replicate the same kind of power and resource distribution issues with a kind of like a new class of brown disabled bodies at the top, whatever. But yeah, I think what this has kind of taken me into over the years is just a kind of exploration of like what, and you know, obviously with all of the learning from all of those spaces that Hannah named before as well, like what does it really mean to think about like how coloniality is being produced through narrative work? And here I think there's like so much overlap and connection with other oppressive systems like racial capitalism we can talk about, or patriarchy, or the words of the late great bell hooks of imperialist white supremacist patriarchal capitalism. hope I've got those words in the right order. You know, in our narrative work at Perk and with other partners across the world, we've seen these features cropping up time and time again. And I think these features of coloniality are around dominance and hierarchy, extraction, exploitation, one way of knowing, productivity and linearity, boom and bust that comes with all of that. And yeah, Hannah and Yaz and I had a little session a few months ago, and borders and binaries of everything was one of the things that we said. Borders and binaries around everything, which I thought was a kind of really crucial one of those features. I'm just going to talk about one, I think, which was just basically knowledge. Sorry, I feel like I've been talking for ages already, but and Yaz kind of hinted at this as well, but doing this kind of work, because we were so in order to be credible, right, in order to be oh yeah, what you're saying is right, you have to be really rigorous and robust with what you're saying. Got all this evidence, and then you look at the evidence, and the evidence has come from primarily you know, the acronym WEIRD, right? So it's Western and educated, and what's the I? Anyway, it's an acronym of privilege that shows up in academia essentially, and what you see of research subjects. Democratic is one of them. Anyway, yeah, it's you're getting a real. This dog is trying to get under my 3-year-old's bed. What are you doing, baby? Totally lost my train of thought.
So much love for that dog. So much love.
Very silly dog. Industrialized. Thanks, Ralph. Thanks, pals. So yeah, so much of our knowledge, so much of what we're basing our understanding on is coming from academia, and so much of academia is, well, I mean, academia is based on a whole load of precepts, and there's structural racism within academia, right? And so there's and it's a site of coloniality, and so it's a consistent reproduction of oh my god, she's not going to get out. How's she going to get out? Okay, we're good. So we know how many people do not have access to academia, and therefore how many voices and ways of knowing are not being presented through that space. So one space that I got, can you hear her? You can probably hear her. Oh god.
Yeah, she's welcome. She's totally welcome.
You're totally welcome, baby. You were welcome. Yeah, so I was reading Chanda Prescott-Weinstein's book last year, The Disordered Cosmos, which I would highly recommend for anyone who likes physics, but also just likes thinking about decoloniality. She's talking specifically about decolonizing physics and science. One of my favorite chapters is called Space-Time Isn't Straight, and she is highlighting how the kind of primacy of colonial Western understandings of the world has pushed us into this one way of understanding time and space-time, and how this idea of linearity has permeated our cultural narratives. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I just got really it was a kind of eureka moment for me, was thinking about how that linearity and how that idea of progress takes us on this kind of we're constantly needing to go forwards way of being, and so whereas we know that learning happens in cycles, right? And it kind of really just resonated with how my experience of how difficult it is to really have time to stop and reflect and review and learn what we're doing or who we are or what we're trying to do. And yeah, so yeah, like if we're privileged enough to be able to write a project plan, the evaluation phase is already like really short. It's like in reality, it's really, really squeezed. When we do, like, when do we actually get the chance to just like sit really quietly by ourselves with like whatever we've just done and like really think about what we've just done, digest it, pull it apart with others for an indefinite amount of time, right? It's just like, it sounds ridiculous when I say it. It's like, you're like, no, we can't do that. We've got like a deadline, we've got to like report to the funders, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And like, but we know how little that serves most of us, right? Like disabled and neurodivergent folks are like marginalized by their needs around time and pace. Like I'm a parent, like I have so many times in which time is like not linear and it's impossible to do things at the time I want. BB is not linear, clearly. Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is that this is like one really key part for me. I'm going to shut up because I've been talking for ages and my dog is, I don't know what to say. I'd love to hear what Maya's got to say.
Thank you, Elena and BB. We'll come back, we'll deepen, we'll explore. Thanks, Elena, for that richness too. Maya, what do you have to share? What does decolonizing narratives mean to you?
Yeah, I really resonate with what's been shared already by Elena and by Yaz, and I don't want to take too much time so that we can have space for questions from all the brilliant folks in the room who I'm sure are thinking about this in many ways as well, in many different ways. But I first want to kind of call in an amazing article written by Tuck and Yang, which is entitled "Decolonization is Not a Metaphor." I'll put it in the chat for those of you who might not have read it yet, but I think it reminds us that decolonization, and of course this takes different forms depending on our positionalities, depending on where we're located, but it's not a metaphor for doing things in a different way, right? It is about physically returning the land. It is about reparations. It is about returning the resources. It is about reshaping the ways that our societies function and the way that we understand kind of the story of the world. And I think that Yaz and Elena have already brought that in. But when I'm thinking about decolonization as somebody that grew up on Turtle Island in some ways as a settler, I think about today's Thanksgiving in what is currently now known in colonial ways as the United States. And I think that's a perfect example of a colonial metaphor, right? Where we have this story of this like idyllic meal exchange between the settler colonial and between the colonized, and then we talk about those people as if they don't exist anymore, and in fact that dinner never happened. And so decolonization in that ways, particularly in terms of narrative, is listening to and lifting up the organizing of Indigenous scholars and activists who are demanding the fundamentalities of land back. And here I'm thinking of the NDN Collective or the Indigenous Environmental Network, from whom I've learned lots and lots about decolonization, both in narrative as well as in praxis. And in the UK, I'm thinking about my own family's story of migration to the UK, to the US, to the diaspora, and for example, the amazing billboards that we've seen in some places that say that we didn't come to Britain, Britain came to us. And I think, grounding ourselves within this narrative, this decolonial narrative of how the nation that folks live in has come to be in. I'll put all the groups in the chat right after. And I'm also thinking about the really important intervention that Elena made around positionality and around power and privilege, right? That being Black and Brown doesn't unilaterally mean that we are explicitly marginalized all the time in all spaces. I'm thinking about, my own positionality as somebody with caste privilege, and how decolonization, including from a narrative scope, means ceding space and lifting up the voices of Dalit and Bahujan and Adivasi folks from the South Asian context and the diasporic context as well. I think something that really stood out to me yesterday, I've been supporting a group of a really amazing Indigenous Khoi and San activists here where I'm currently residing in Cape Town, who are fighting the development of a proposed new Amazon headquarters that would not only massively gentrify Cape Town and would not likely provide quality jobs to folks who live here already, but is also proposed to be built on sacred Indigenous land. And in this meeting yesterday, where we were doing kind of a community discussion about our dreams for what decoloniality could look in praxis, I think the Goreng Aigona scholars and activists in the room really lifted up Indigenous knowledge patterns and histories, and that even within our praxis of decoloniality and decolonizing narrative, there can be times where we're still recentering white supremacist work culture, right? Or the nonprofit industrial complex. So I think those are just like lots of complications and tensions for us to hold in the work. But I think what it looks like is holding space for emotions like anger, like affect, things that are often like sanitized or thought of as not appropriate when we're talking about these narratives and stories. It looks like resourcing the storytelling of communities ourselves and creating systems for that to be lifted up. I think it looks like not a DEIJ or JEDI or whatever training, but really reshaping the way that we do work to center justice. And that may mean stepping out of the way in many cases. And I'm thinking also about the work, for example, of Tony Cade Bambara, an amazing artist, writer, many things, who says that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. So in these ways, I think part of decolonizing narratives is not just changing the way that we talk about the same thing, but about fundamentally holding narrative strategy as an integral part of how we do our organizing and activist practice. And that means talking to people about the dreams and the visions that we have for the world ourselves. What is the knowledge? What are the hopes? What are the ideas that our people already hold, and centering that within the way that we're talking and doing the work. I think narrative provides space for us, as we've talked about, to reimagine the world, right? Not just to talk about what's wrong, but talk about what could be. And so in that way, the praxis of conversations with communities, the praxis of organizing, of communications and storytelling is a praxis of holding space for those collective visions and dreams. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. That we've heard, like, thank you to Yaz, Elena and Maya for inviting so much breadth and depth into the opening of the conversation today. I'm going to invite us all to just take a moment to check in with our bodies, with our emotions, with our streams of thought, with where we're at, where this is landing for us each. So take a moment in the spirit that Elena invited in to reflect for a minute and share any questions that might be coming up for you in the chat box, or put your hands up and we will open the discussion out some more. So let's just take a minute to check in whatever way feels good for you. If you need pen or paper, or if you need to gaze out of a window, if you need to stretch into your body to feel where the wisdom from inside us is leading us, take that moment. Thanks so much, Maya, for sharing those resources as well. Such a lot of richness in there. I look forward to digging in as well. Okay, so we've got sort of 15 minutes now for further questions and chat together as a group for everyone who's here. So I'm just checking in the chat box and I can see some input from Ralph around the language of decolonizing and colonization itself and the challenges of academic accessibility. Should we try and produce a more accessible alternative to help widen this debate? I think the term helps to hide or sanitize the harm that has been done. Don't have a solution, sadly, just wonder if we need to also decolonize the framing of decolonization itself. Sorry to go so meta. No problem, Ralph, it's all welcome. Who wants to take this from the panel? Anyone want to jump in? I'm gonna see Elena, would you like to?
Why not? Thanks, Ralph. I feel like this question is very in character. Ralph and I used to work together. For context, Ralph likes going meta. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some legitimate, I feel like there's definitely a space for thinking about how we talk about this. And also I think that given the subject, it's like worth being led by the folks who by the colonized, I suppose. And I think there's a like I think there's a lot of language around decolonization that is being used by folks of colonized spaces and colonized places. So I guess maybe it's about who are we trying to talk to and in what spaces, what are we talking for, what are our purposes, and I think you're right, I think it might be different for different purposes, for a whole host of reasons.
Thanks, Elena. Is there any Yaz or Maya, would you like to come in on that, or shall we go to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think just echoing that, I think centering the what else is so important. So, Elena lifting up reparations. And again, what does that actually look like? Not just as a term of art or an idea, but what does it look like in practice, right? I mean, for example, we can talk about policies within the state of California that are exploring the actual mechanics of reparation from resources extracted from enslavement and human trafficking to the descendants of African Black folks who were trafficked to the US. So I think, I don't feel personally super tied to decolonization as the only term that we use, right? I think a lot of it is about thinking about what is the organizing, what does the work look like on the ground, and also what are the words that the folks that are the most directly impacted in the communities where we're spending time, what are the words that folks are using? What are the words that resonate, or what are the actions, the praxis points that resonate there?
Thanks, Maya. Seeing lots of nodding from Yaz as well. I was just gonna, I wanted to ask, just having heard a lot of different features of colonial narratives from all of you in different ways, and thinking about Elena's naming of hierarchy, of dominance, of difference, of othering. Yes, I wondered if you wanted to share any more of your own experience of where you see colonial narratives in your experience, thinking about your Cypriot identity, and would you like to bring some of that into the space?
Yeah, I can bring it in. And I think, just really appreciating everything that Elena and Maya have just said, and I think it kind of relates. That one way we speak to each other is through like our I guess like these terms are like broad overarching like descriptors, but then we can talk about all the different experiences that folks have. I've been thinking a lot with the death of the Queen, actually, about how much my grandmother loves the Queen and was really sad when the Queen died. My grandma was actually in Cyprus when it happened, spending time in the village where her family is from, and so she couldn't. There's no internet or like phone service, and the TVs were all down, so she couldn't actually watch any of what was going on. And she was really sad about it. And it's fascinating to me because she was like born under British colonial rule in Cyprus, and then when the British decided to hand Cyprus over to Greece and then Turkey invaded Cyprus, like there was I don't know, it just really messed up the country and put it into, again, like what I see as a real feature of colonialism, which is binaries, having two halves of an island and being like, there's one half and another half, and like that's how it is, and you are like part of one group or the other group. And I'm not articulating myself very well, but I think it's like really interesting the narratives that play into that she was brought up with, of like Britain being this amazing great place, and you know there was like multiple narratives happening that enabled Turkey to invade the island. She talked to me about like being very young, and even though the country was under British colonial rule, there was Turkish speakers and Greek speakers, and everyone's Cypriot, but that this narrative of you are Turkish or Greek, which is again those islands trying to take control over this other island, was like really strong. And so like when she was like a really young kid, like they used to like wave their Turkish flags and say like Ya Taksim Ya Ölüm, which means like partition or I'll die. And like this is the thing that they were saying to like getting her as a 6-year-old to chant on the streets. And so to her, like she is Turkish and she's always been Turkish. And like for me, growing up and discovering that Cypriot is a whole other thing was wild to me, because I'd always been told that I was Turkish. So there's just all this like convoluted stuff, but it makes me think about how powerful these narratives are, that she was like this idea that she's Turkish, which Turkish is basically like Turkey is basically a colonizer of this island right now. This idea that she is that Britain is great and the Queen is great, that still lives with her to this day, so many years after, when she had to flee because of the conflict that happened in Cyprus when the British left. And so and because of being there in the first place. If they'd never been there in the first place, it wouldn't have happened. So it's like very, I don't know, I'm going on a bit of a like now, but like it makes me think about how powerful those narratives are, and it makes me think about how much it will take to like shift some of those narratives as well.
Yeah, thanks, Yaz. I'm just wanting to welcome in like building on Yaz's reflections on the experiencing colonial narratives, binaries, borders within a separate identity. I can see Diana's comment in the chat box. Diana, if you would like to unmute and share it into the space, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I can read it out for you. What would you prefer?
I'm happy to read it out. And so I was just thinking, because I've also thought about this before, using these terms. And I think there is something about if you live and grow up in a colonized country, you do end up like knowing what the term means just by living there, just by experience. It does become part of your day-to-day that it is mentioned, and certain things are explained using that language. So then, yeah, so I guess it's just like similar to what Elena was saying, that it's like for some people, those terms will make sense. But then I also think there are some questions about why do those terms not make sense in other places, and then kind of exploring that space as well. And yeah, just some general thoughts around that. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing yourself in. Very, very grateful to actually welcome us properly into this space beyond the chat box. Thanks, Diana. And then Safra, would you like to share your input into the space as well, or would you like me to read it out? Oh yeah, totally fair. So question from Safra. When working with marginalized groups and considering the complexities of intersectionality under the current mainstream narratives and realities of multiple crises, energy, cost of living, climate, cover trauma, etc., how do we move ourselves and people to a place of visioning, reimagining, hope, outside of our learned colonial thinking, behavior, understandings of power, especially for those without the education or awareness of colonial influence or direct connections to their familial or personal colonial histories? Who would like to take this? Maya, would you like to start off? You're welcome to pass it.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. I think one of the things is making sure that the work that we're doing is actually addressing the lived experience and needs of people in the current moment, right? Like, I think a lot of times we expect people to come into a space and be ready to talk about whatever we're deciding is on the agenda. And I think there's something fundamentally different about like shaping what we're talking about based on the will of the people with whom we're in community with. So, if what people are thinking about is how high heating bills are, that's the thing that we should be talking about right now, right? And then we use that as a space to imagine what could be different. What would it look like if this were not the case? So I think instead of, like addressing the elephant in the room, so to speak, right? Like working from the thing that motivates people to organize and to be in community with each other anyway, which is oftentimes the harms that the racist, cis heterophobic state wields on us. And I think, in both of these two questions, we've had this thing about like colonized nations versus not colonized nations. And I think I'd like to kind of push back on that a little bit. Like I think there's basically no country, if we're talking about national borders, which in and of themselves are, oftentimes very much constructed, but there's almost no place that has not been affected by some system of colonization, right? Whether your heritage is from a place that was doing the colonizing or you were from a place that was experiencing the colonizing. And I think, we can think about the way that the UK exists as a nation today. It has always existed as a nation that has been built off of the backs of colonized labor, right? So there is no UK within the territorial boundaries of the state that exists without the day-to-day experience of coloniality, right? Like I think we would be hard pressed to exist in a space in the UK that has not in some way extracted wealth and benefited from that wealth. So I think those like boundaries of what is colonized or not are a bit more porous, especially with globalization and migration across national or colonial borders. So I think holding space for all of that, for people's lived experience, like, Yaz just brought in of our ancestors, of our own families, is really important. And maybe if we're feeling like we don't have that deep connection to the work, maybe that's also a time for self-reflection of like, should other people be in this work with me in a more resourced way as well? And I think that's important for us to ask ourselves too. I hope that was a tangible enough answer. I think there's like particular things in pedagogy and like workshop pedagogy that are useful for this as well. And I really find the work of somatic practitioners to be incredibly helpful. For example, like the National Domestic Workers Alliance in the US, who work with folks who are largely migrant workers, and holding space for the way that trauma and colonization lives within the body as an integral part of the organizing that we do together is something that I think has been like so powerful in my own praxis of organizing and in getting us to a place where we can vision, where we're not just in this like fight or flight mode of existence, which is what capitalism tries to do to us.
I hear you, Maya. I hear you, Maya. And I've got, I really want us to have all of the space time for this conversation. And I'm aware that we've got about 3 minutes left. And so I wanted to just do a sense check. If you could type in the chat box, if you'd be interested in us running a follow-up session to this, where we get a little bit more into the weeds, into the depths of the discussion. Something that we haven't had time to explore today is particularly thinking a bit more about like what is the practical action that is needed, the reparations that is needed within the narrative change sector to act on this. So we touched at the beginning of the session through Yaz, Elena and Maya's opening go round around both the features of coloniality and decoloniality in narratives and the ways that coloniality shows up in the narrative change space. So I'd love for us to have some space and time to get into that more. And it looks like there's a lot of appetite for that too in the group. So we will be coming back to this, it looks like, if you're all keen. And we'd love to welcome Yasma and Elena back if they'd like to join us for a follow-up as well, but we'll explore that. So yeah, we're at 1:15. A huge thank you to Yaz, Maya and Elena for bringing your felt lived experiences into the space, your wisdom, your knowledge, your bodies and beings thank you. And thanks everybody for coming along to join us for this opener, this like part of an ongoing journey, windy journey together. So I think that's it for today. We are hoping to have a follow-up workshop in the new year on February the 15th for folks to come and get creative with us on how we design some of the next steps of PERC's narrative change work. We're planning on running a narrative leadership program in 2023, which we're deeply excited about, and we have a lot of dreaming still to go do, and we'd like to do that together with you. So we'll share some in the follow-up to the session more about how you can come and get stuck in with us if you'd like to, and we'd love to learn from you and your experiences too. So that's it for today. Thank you all for coming. Sorry we weren't able to get to all your questions and comments, but we'd love to continue this with you. Yaz, Maya, Elena, if you'd like to say anything to close, you're very welcome to. All good?
Just to say like a big thanks to everyone, and like a little reminder to like shake or breathe or like, you know, give your heart a little rub, or like the things that you need to like do something nice for yourself and land coming out of this session.
Please do. Take care for yourself and your people and one another. We're in this together in all of our beauty and difference and connection. So thanks everybody, take care. We'll share what we can from the session afterwards and we'll be in touch. Much love to all.